Why haven't you sent that burden away yet? My daughter-in-law's voice sliced through the room before I even had the chance to set my purse down. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation shouted with the force of someone who wanted every soul present to hear it. The music stopped. The chatter died. And then, every head in that crowded living room turned toward me. I stood in the doorway, framed by winter light spilling in behind me, suddenly feeling like a shadow in my own family. My hands tightened around the straps of my overnight bag, though I'm not sure why. Maybe to keep them from trembling, maybe because I needed something solid to hold onto while the world tilted under my feet. People filled every corner of the house. Some I recognized. Many I didn't. Strangers lounging on my furniture, their laughter still hanging in the air like smoke. Coat sleeves draped across the banister. Cups and half-eaten food cluttering the coffee table I once polished every Sunday. Children I'd never met running between legs, bumping into my knees without looking up. My daughter-in-law, Marissa, stood in the center of it all, framed by her own family like a queen surrounded by courtiers. Her arms were crossed, her lips curled just enough to show satisfaction. And her eyes, cold, narrowed, unblinking, stayed on me as if daring me to challenge her. A hush fell so heavy it felt like the room inhaled and forgot how to exhale. Even the guests who had no idea who I was stared at me with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Waiting to see what I'd do, waiting, maybe, to see if the burden would speak. Humiliation washed over me in one sharp, searing wave. My face grew hot. My knees weakened. And for a heartbeat, I genuinely wondered if I'd collapse right there on my own front rug. But I didn't say a word. Not yet. Because in that moment, before anger or grief or disbelief could take shape, something else rose inside me. Something colder, quieter, older. The familiar ache of being dismissed, overlooked, erased. If you've ever walked into a room and felt yourself become invisible, felt the weight of someone deciding you don't belong, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Stories like mine aren't just stories. They're reminders that our voices still matter, no matter who tries to silence them. Now, let me tell you how it all began. I stayed frozen in that doorway longer than I care to admit. The sting of Marissa's words clung to me, settling deep in places I thought had grown tough with age. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand who I am, and why her calling me a burden cut straight to the bone. My name is Elaine Porter, and I turned 72 this past spring. 72 years of working, sacrificing, raising, scrubbing, saving, stitching together a life with hands that have known both miracles and hardship. For 39 of those years, I worked as a nurse. Long shifts, double shifts, holidays, nights that bled into mornings. I bathed patients whose own children wouldn't visit. I held hands as final breaths were taken. I soothed fevers, changed dressings, and whispered encouragement to strangers who clung to me like family. My back may curve now, and my knees may grumble whenever the weather shifts, but these hands have spent a lifetime carrying others. And somehow now, I was being told that I was the weight dragging everyone else down. I raised one child, my son, David, after my husband passed when I was 42. A widow far too young, with too many bills and not enough hours in the day. I stitched my grief into the seams of his childhood, somehow managing to keep the world from swallowing us whole. Every promotion, every extra shift, every dollar pinned to the underside of my dresser, it was all for him. I wanted him to have more than I ever did. Opportunity, stability, a home where love didn't have to fight for breathing room. I never remarried. I never complained. I never considered myself less just because the world sometimes insisted I shrink. But age has a way of turning people's respect into pity, and pity into dismissal. I've felt that shift quietly over the years. The slow erosion of being listened to, the way people soften their tone as if speaking to a child, the way space opens up around you at family gatherings, not out of courtesy, but because you're becoming an afterthought. Still, I never imagined the day would come when someone would look at me, at everything I've survived, everything I've built, and call me a burden. Yet that's exactly what happened, and it wasn't a stranger who did it. It was family. And that made it hurt in a way nothing else ever has. I stepped farther into the house, my house, trying to steady my breath as the door clicked shut behind me. The warmth inside didn't feel welcoming. It felt smothering, like someone had draped a heavy blanket over my chest. The living room, once my quiet sanctuary, had transformed into something unrecognizable. People I barely knew were sprawled across my furniture like they owned it, shoes kicked off, feet propped up, coats tossed over armrests. A stranger's purse sat open on my coffee table, right beside the photo of my late husband I kept polished and dust-free. Marissa's family had taken over every corner. Her sister chatting loudly on speakerphone, her cousin rummaging through the snack cabinet, her nephew flicking crumbs onto the rug I bought the year David graduated. Even the children, 3 of them, wild and restless, chased each other with sticky hands that threatened every fabric surface they brushed past. The air was thick with perfume and the sour scent of spilled wine. Plates clattered. Laughter bursted in sharp bursts. Music thumped from someone's phone, far too loud for this space. My home, normally so still, so carefully tended, felt violated. And yet, not one person greeted me. Not one paused to acknowledge that I'd stepped into the room. Marissa stood stiffly near the fireplace, her arms crossed like she was guarding her position. Her dark hair was perfectly curled, makeup pristine, eyes sharp enough to cut. She watched me with the kind of cold assurance that comes from believing the room belongs to you. Not the woman who paid for every board in the floor beneath your feet. She didn't welcome me. She didn't soften her tone. She didn't even pretend. Don't just stand there, she finally muttered, loud enough for the entire room to hear. You're blocking the doorway. A few people glanced up, offering quick, uncomfortable looks before returning to their conversations. Like I was an interruption in their afternoon, nothing more. I set my overnight bag down by the wall, suddenly unsure where I was supposed to stand. There was no space left on the sofa, no empty chairs, no corner untouched by the chaos of Marissa's gathering. The house felt full, packed, bursting, yet I had never felt more out of place. Marissa's mother sat on the love seat knitting something with bright red yarn. She didn't bother hiding her disapproval as she eyed me, head to toe like a worn-out object someone forgot to throw away. Her cousin whispered something under her breath, followed by a snicker. My heart tightened. This wasn't just a busy afternoon. This was an invasion. A deliberate one. A coordinated one. A takeover masked as family time. Because no one had told me they'd be here. No one had asked permission. No one had even texted. They were settled in deeply, comfortably, shamelessly, as if my home had been reassigned to them while I was away. And the longer I stood there, the clearer it became. I wasn't simply unwelcome. I wasn't simply overlooked. I was being pushed out, quietly, subtly, intentionally. And this was only the beginning. I tried to anchor myself, to breathe past the noise and find a sliver of familiarity in the place I once tended like a garden. But the more I looked, the more wrong everything felt. It wasn't just the clutter or the strangers, it was the quiet, unsettling sense that I had stepped into a home that no longer remembered me. Marissa brushed past me on her way to the kitchen, not even bothering to excuse herself when her shoulder knocked lightly against mine. She opened my refrigerator, rummaging through shelves with the confidence of someone who'd done it many times before. "Where's the good olive oil?" she muttered to her sister. Her sister shrugged. Maybe she hid it. Marissa scoffed. Of course she did. I blinked. Hid it? I had stocked that fridge myself last week. Every item had its place, because I lived alone now, and order mattered to me. But as Marissa slammed the fridge door shut, something caught my eye. A drawer, one I always kept aligned, was hanging slightly open. I felt a strange flutter in my stomach. "Marissa," I started gently, "has someone been going through my..." She cut me off with a bright, almost mocking smile. "Oh, we've been organizing. This place needs to be more functional." There it was. That word. Casual, careless, and dripping with meaning. Functional. I repeated. She waved her hand dismissively. "You know, useful. We're thinking of making some changes." She said it lightly, as if we were chatting over tea instead of standing in my kitchen, surrounded by people I didn't invite, her family treating my home like a rental property. Useful. Changes. Organizing. My pulse tapped at the inside of my wrist. Then, as if wanting to twist the moment a little deeper into me, Marissa leaned closer and said, It's silly for this place to sit here empty. Don't you agree? I didn't answer. Her sister's eyes darted toward me amused. Her mother's needles clicked faster. And suddenly, I realized what felt so off. This wasn't a spontaneous visit. This wasn't a casual family gathering. They were too comfortable. Too settled. Too familiar with the cabinets, the layout, the drawers. Something had shifted long before I walked through that door. Marissa was not simply hosting. She was rearranging, reclaiming, repurposing, as if the house were already hers. And I was just a leftover piece of clutter. She hoped someone would finally move out of the way. The first hint of betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, hidden in the casual way she said useful. And that single word lodged itself in my chest like a cold, sharp needle. Standing there in my own kitchen, surrounded by strangers and swallowed by Marissa's casual arrogance, I felt something tighten inside me. A pressure rising from a place far older than this moment. Because this house, this home they were treating like a weekend rental, wasn't just a structure of walls and windows. It was the last piece of a life I built out of hardship, love, and sheer determination. To understand why their intrusion burned so deeply, you need to know the history woven into every floorboard beneath my feet. I grew up in a 2-room apartment above a laundromat my mother cleaned for extra cash. My father worked at the mill, disappeared into 12-hour shifts, came home coated in metallic dust. We didn't have much, but my parents taught me the two things that kept me alive my entire life: dignity and grit. My mother used to say, "You fight for your place in the world, Elaine. No one hands it to you." I carried those words with me into adulthood. I married young, too young maybe, but I never regretted the years I had with my husband, Samuel. He was steady, kind, patient. The kind of man who noticed when the world grew too heavy on my shoulders and quietly offered his own. We worked hard, God, did we work? He repaired heating systems. I worked nights as a nurse. We spent years living paycheck to paycheck, saving what little we could in a jar we kept hidden behind the flour tin. The dream was always the same. A small house with enough quiet for our hearts to rest. But dreams don't always follow the plans you make for them. Samuel died when I was 42. A sudden heart attack. One moment I was making dinner, and the next I was clinging to his hand in the back of an ambulance, begging him not to leave me. He was gone before my tears hit the fabric of his uniform. What followed were the hardest years of my life. I raised our son David alone. I picked up extra shifts, worked holidays, slept in the chair beside his bed when I came home too exhausted to make it down the hall. And still I saved. Little by little. Dollar by dollar. Not for luxury. Not for show. But for peace. Something I had never known in my youth. When David turned 17, a realtor called me about an old lake cottage 2 hours away. The place was worn and weathered, but when I stepped inside, I felt something shift in my chest. Sunlight streamed through cracked windows, dust danced in the beams, and the air smelled like pine and possibility. I bought it. I bought it with the jar savings, with my overtime checks, with the money I earned stitching neighbors' clothes after long hospital shifts. I scrubbed the walls with my own hands, patched the roof, repainted every room. I planted flowers in the backyard that Samuel would have loved. I hung our wedding photo near the front door so he'd still be the first to greet anyone who walked in. This house became my refuge. My sanctuary. My proof that I could survive anything. David grew up visiting this place every summer. He fished off the dock with me, roasted marshmallows by the fire pit, told me about his dreams under the quiet hum of crickets. He used to say, "Mom, this house feels alive. It feels like Dad's still here." And every time, I'd nod, even though my throat tightened with grief. And now? To stand here decades later, watching Marissa's family wipe their shoes on the rugs I once knelt on while brushing Samuel's ashes from the fireplace. To hear her talk about making changes, to the home that held every memory worth keeping. To see strangers' fingerprints on the surfaces I polished with love. It wasn't just disrespect. It wasn't inconvenience. It was erasure. Everything Samuel and I built, everything I sacrificed as a widow, everything I gave up so David could have a better life, was being treated as disposable. They weren't just invading my house. They were invading my history, my marriage, my motherhood, my survival. And I felt, deep down, that something far worse was coming. Much worse. 2 days after Marissa's biting, useful comment, I found the second sign. One that made my stomach drop so sharply I had to grab the edge of the counter to steady myself. It happened in the late afternoon, when the house had finally grown quiet. Marissa's relatives had gone into town, leaving behind the usual mess: crumbs on my rug, dishes in my sink, chairs pushed back carelessly from the table. I moved through the room slowly, picking things up not because I wanted to clean after them, but because doing something familiar kept my hands from shaking. On the dining table, beneath a stack of abandoned board games and an open bag of chips, something white caught my eye. Just the corner of an envelope, plain, crisp, and definitely not one of mine. I pulled it free, frowning. It had David's name on it, but not this house's address. Not his home. Why was his mail being delivered here? A cold ripple moved through me. The return address read, Lakeside Development and Contracting. My breath hitched. I knew that company. They built vacation homes, renovated older properties, bought land, sold land, carved pieces of towns into profitable slices for whoever waved the biggest check. Hands trembling slightly, I opened the envelope just enough to slide the papers out. Blueprints, estimates, design mock-ups, page after page of renovations, massive invasive changes, walls to be removed, rooms to be expanded, a completely redesigned kitchen, a deck extension, even a new master suite. But what made my knees weaken was the title at the top. Project, Porter Lake House, client, David Porter. Not Elaine. Not me. David. My son. I stared at the papers, my pulse thudding in my ears. The plans carried price tags, tens of thousands of dollars. And in bold near the top, the start date read, pending approval of property transfer. Property transfer. Property transfer. The words echoed like footsteps in an empty hallway. My throat dried. I flipped through the stack again, desperate to find something, anything, to tell myself this was a misunderstanding. But there, in faint pencil beside one of the drawings, I recognized Marissa's handwriting. We can open this up. Mom won't need this room. Mom. She was talking about me as though I were a stranger they were planning around. Or removing. Suddenly, so many small details sharpened into a single chilling truth. The comfort they moved with. The entitlement. The useful comments. The sudden crowding of the house. The organizing. The rearranging. This wasn't a visit. It was preparation. I slid the documents back into the envelope as footsteps approached down the hall. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tucked it under a stack of newspapers just as Marissa's cousin wandered in, humming to herself, oblivious. I forced a smile. Forced my breath to steady. Forced my hands not to tremble. But inside, something had cracked open. This wasn't just disrespect or rudeness. Something bigger was happening. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of real fear. The envelope had rattled me, but what happened next stripped away any lingering hope that this was all a misunderstanding. It started early the following morning. I woke before dawn, as I always did, padding softly through the hallway in my slippers. The house was unusually still. Finally free of the constant chatter and footsteps of Marissa's relatives. For a moment I let myself breathe, hoping the quiet meant I could reclaim at least a piece of my routine. But as I walked past my bedroom, something felt wrong. My door, always closed, was cracked open. A faint strip of yellow hallway light cut across the rug inside. My heartbeat quickened. I knew I hadn't opened it. I kept that room private. Sacred. It held the last pieces of Samuel's life, neatly folded and preserved. It held the small lockbox with our marriage license, the deed, my personal letters, and the savings documents I still updated every few months. I pushed the door open the rest of the way and felt the world tilt. Drawers were slightly ajar. The closet door was open. A few of my blouses hung crookedly, like someone had rifled through them. And on the bed, on the quilt my mother stitched by hand nearly 50 years ago, lay a stack of papers that absolutely should have been inside my lockbox. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. I shuffled forward and lifted the top paper with trembling fingers. It was my insurance paperwork, except the beneficiary name had been crossed out in pencil. A new name written faintly beside it, then erased. I flipped to the next page. My property tax documents, dragged out of order. Then another. My deed. Folded wrong, creased at the corner, as if handled carelessly, entirely out of place. A chill ran from my shoulders to my fingertips. Someone had gone through everything. My private drawers. My personal records. The lockbox key I kept hidden inside a mug in the top kitchen cabinet, suddenly missing. I sank onto the bed, hands clutching the documents like shields. A sick understanding crept in, slow and suffocating. They weren't just planning renovations. They weren't just rearranging the house. They were preparing to take it. To take everything. Just then, footsteps pattered down the hallway, light hurried. I scrambled to gather the papers, sliding them under the quilt just as Marissa appeared in the doorway. "Oh," she said, eyebrows lifting in mock surprise. "You're awake early." Her eyes flicked, not subtly, to the bed, to the quilt, to my shaking hands. And then she smiled. That tight, calculated smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We should talk later," she murmured. "About future plans." Future plans. The words lodged in my throat like a thorn. She turned and walked away, her perfume lingering like smoke. The moment she was gone, I pulled the papers out again, my breath trembling. There would be no more pretending. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't coincidence. This was deliberate, coordinated, dangerous. And I realized, fully, painfully, that I was standing at the edge of something much bigger than family tension. I was standing at the edge of a betrayal I couldn't yet fully see, but could no longer deny. I sat on the edge of my bed long after Marissa's footsteps faded, staring at the documents spread around me. My fingers brushed the familiar textures, crisp pages, worn edges, the soft fabric of the quilt beneath them, and a heaviness settled in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. For a moment, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe someone had simply been curious. Maybe the lockbox key hadn't been hidden as well as I thought. Maybe, just maybe, this was all a coincidence stitched together by fear. But the more I tried to soften the truth, the louder another voice rose inside me. A voice I hadn't heard since the early days of widowhood. The voice that kept me upright when Samuel died, that kept food on the table when I worked double shifts, that kept David's childhood from collapsing under the weight of poverty. That voice whispered one simple sentence. "Open your eyes." So I did. I thought of the envelope with David's name, the renovation plans, Marissa's handwriting marking which rooms I wouldn't need. My drawers opened, my documents handled, beneficiary lines smudged, the missing key, her family taking over the house without hesitation, her biting comments about functionality, her cold eyes when she called me a burden. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. This wasn't disrespect. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't tension between in-laws. This was a plan. A coordinated, calculated plan to push me out of my own home. Quietly, steadily, while smiling in my face. And whether David was part of it or simply following along like a man caught between duty and convenience, I didn't know yet. But the blueprint didn't lie. The altered documents didn't lie. The invasion of my private space didn't lie. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling the heavy thud of my heartbeat. Somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the humiliation, a new emotion stirred. Resolve. They thought age made me fragile. They thought loneliness made me blind. They thought grief had softened me. But they were wrong. So very wrong. I had survived worse than this. And I was not going to let anyone, family or not, erase me from the life I built with my own hands. Once the truth settled into my bones, something in me hardened. Not cruelly, not recklessly, but with the quiet steel of a woman who has survived storms far worse than entitled whispers and hidden papers. I wiped my eyes, straightened my back, and gathered every document on the bed. If they wanted to make me disappear from my own life, they were about to discover just how impossible that would be. The first thing I did was fetch the small spiral notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer for grocery lists. I brought it to my bedroom and wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. Then slowly, methodically, I began recording everything. The envelope. The renovation plans. The penciled beneficiary changes. The missing lockbox key. The strangers occupying my home. The comments about making the house useful. The rummage drawers. Marissa's controlling presence. I documented every detail, down to the time and who was present. Not because I thought anyone would believe me immediately, but because I knew documentation was power. As a nurse, I had learned that first lesson early. When you record the truth, you can defend the truth. After that, I propped my phone up on my nightstand, hit the voice memo button, and quietly recounted everything into the microphone. My voice shook at first, but strength returned as the words left my mouth. Speaking the truth out loud made it feel real, solid. No longer something I could brush aside as paranoia. In the afternoon, when the house buzzed again with voices and movement, I moved silently through the rooms, my phone tucked discreetly in my apron pocket. Anytime someone said something suspect, anything that confirmed their intentions, I clicked record. Each snippet became another piece of armor. But I didn't stop there. I dug through the hall closet and found the small motion-activated camera my husband and I once bought after raccoons kept getting into the trash bins. I placed it discreetly behind the vase in the living room, angled toward the hallway that led to my bedroom. Another I set on top of the bookshelf with a view of the dining area. They were old but reliable, and they didn't need Wi-Fi, just batteries and a memory card. If someone entered my bedroom again, I would know. If someone searched my drawers again, I would see it. And if anyone discussed plans they had no right to make, I would hear it. That night, after everyone finally settled, I pretended to sleep in my room, but kept the door cracked just enough to listen. My heart ached as I heard Marissa whisper sharply to her sister in the hallway. "She needs to stop being difficult," she hissed. "David is already stressed. The sooner we finalize things, the sooner everyone can breathe." Finalize what? Breathe from what? I clutched my blanket, anger blooming hot beneath my ribs. Later, when the house grew quieter, I made a call I hadn't expected to make. I dialed my old friend Linda, a retired social worker with connections, knowledge, and a spine that never softened with age. When she heard my voice, she said, "Elaine, honey, what's wrong?" I hesitated, shame prickling my skin. I had never needed help like this. But I forced the words out. "I think someone is trying to take my home." She didn't dismiss me. She didn't doubt me. She simply inhaled sharply and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. When I finished, she sighed, a mixture of sadness and anger. "I've seen this before," she murmured. "More often than you'd think. Elder exploitation starts subtle. They take small things first. Access, authority, paperwork, trust. But you caught it early. You're strong. And you're not alone." Her reassurance steadied me. "Start protecting everything," she continued. "Scan your documents. Photograph them. Make copies. Store them somewhere safe. And Elaine, do not confront them yet. Not until you know exactly what you're dealing with." I wrote every instruction down. The next morning, while Marissa's family lounged around the house, I told them I needed fresh air and walked to the small library in town. There, using the public scanner, I digitized every important document: deed, insurance, bank statements, marriage certificate, tax records. I emailed copies to myself, to Linda, and saved them onto a small flash drive I tucked inside my coat pocket. When I returned, Marissa greeted me at the door with a brittle smile. "Where did you go?" "Just running errands," I replied, matching her tone with quiet politeness. But she studied me, really studied me, as if she sensed a shift. Because there was one. I was no longer the confused, overwhelmed woman she thought she could manipulate. I was preparing. Quietly, carefully, strategically. And they would never see it coming. For all the signs, all the whispers, all the quiet intrusions, nothing prepared me for the moment that truly broke something inside me. The moment I heard my own son choose convenience over his mother. It happened late one evening, after Marissa's family had gone out for dinner. The house was finally, mercifully silent. I was in the guest room, my room, once, organizing copied documents into a folder when I overheard voices drifting from the living room. At first, I thought Marissa was alone, venting her usual frustrations. But then I heard his voice. David. My heart leapt and then tightened. I hadn't seen much of him these past weeks. He always arrived late, left early, or busied himself in the garage whenever I tried to talk. I missed him. My sweet boy who used to hug me without hesitation, who used to fall asleep on my lap during thunderstorms. I moved closer to the doorway and stood still, the folder pressed to my chest. Marissa's tone was sharp and biting. She's dragging her feet, David. You can't let her stall this anymore. My breath caught. Stall what? David exhaled sharply. I know, but she's my mom. This is complicated. Complicated. Not wrong. Not unethical. Just complicated. Marissa scoffed. She's living alone in a house that's falling apart. This renovation would make things easier for everyone. She should be grateful. Grateful? For being erased? David didn't respond right away. I could picture him rubbing the back of his neck, eyes downward, the way he always did when avoiding something painful. Then he said the words that cracked something deep in my chest. Maybe it's for the best if she moves out. The room spun slightly. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. Marissa's voice softened, not with empathy but manipulation. It will reduce your stress, David. You're constantly worrying about her. And we need that house in our name to get the loan approved. You know that. This is the easiest way forward. Loan. Approved. House in their name. My fingers tightened around the folder so hard the edges bent. David's voice low and tired. Okay, you're right. Let's just finish the paperwork and get this done. Finish the paperwork. Get this done. The boy I raised, the one I held through fevered nights, fed when we barely had food, defended when the world tried to break him, was agreeing to push me out of the only home I had left. I didn't move. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry, not yet. But something inside me shifted. A clean, deep cut. The kind that leaves a mark long after it heals. Marissa continued, her tone smug now that she'd gotten her way. She won't fight it. She's old. She trusts you. Just talk to her when the timing is right. Old. Trusts you. The irony tasted bitter. As she spoke, I heard the soft rustle of papers, documents being spread across the table. My documents. Or copies of them. Or forged versions. I didn't know yet. I didn't want to imagine. David sighed again. I don't want her upset. Marissa replied sharply. Then don't give her time to question it. Just be firm. We're doing the right thing. The right thing. Those 3 words hollowed me out. I slipped back into the guest room, closed the door quietly, and set the folder down on the bed. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something colder. Something sharper. Betrayal. It wasn't just that Marissa wanted me gone. I knew that from the start. But David, my son, had crossed the line between weakness and participation. And the moment he did, something inside me steeled. Family ties or not, I would not allow anyone to take what I fought for. Not my home. Not my dignity. Not my future. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I whispered to myself, they think I won't fight back. A pause. But they've forgotten who raised them. And with that clarity, a new resolve settled deep within me. The confrontation was coming. And I would be ready. The night after I heard David's voice agreeing, however reluctantly, to push me out of my own home, something inside me aligned with frightening clarity. The grief, the disbelief, the shaking hurt, all of it slowly cooled into focus. If they wanted a quiet, compliant old woman, they had chosen the wrong target. The next morning, I woke before anyone else. The sky was still gray, the lake outside wrapped in dawn mist. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and spread out everything I had gathered. Documents, notes, scanned copies, my little notebook filled with time-stamped entries. My hands were steady now. My breathing calm. I organized every piece of evidence into neat, labeled folders. Folder 1, renovation plans. Folder 2, altered documents. Folder 3, voice recordings and transcripts. Folder 4, footage from the cameras. Folder 5, legal documents, original and scanned copies. Then I made duplicates of each set. One I tucked into my tote bag. The other I sealed inside a large envelope addressed to Linda. Insurance. If something happened. If they tried to rush me. If they tried to corner me. Someone else would know the truth. By mid-morning, Marissa's family began stirring. They didn't notice me sitting there, quietly watching. They were preoccupied, more whispers, more hushed discussions, more glances at their phones. A nervous energy had replaced their earlier arrogance. They knew something was coming. What they didn't know was that I was the one preparing it. Around noon, they gathered in the living room. Papers were spread out again. I recognized the edge of the folder David had been holding the night before. The tension between them was palpable, anticipation mixed with impatience. "We should do it today," Marissa said. "She's calm this morning. Now's the perfect time." Her mother nodded in agreement. "End it cleanly. These things get messy when you give too much time. End it cleanly." They had no idea I was only a few steps away listening. I went to my bedroom one last time and rechecked everything. My folders, my flash drive, my phone already set to record. I slipped the tote bag over my shoulder. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. My hands didn't tremble. Instead, a stillness settled over me. A strength I'd forgotten I possessed. This wasn't the panic of a cornered woman. This was the quiet readiness of someone who had finally stopped hoping they'd do the right thing. By early afternoon, I heard Marissa call my name from the living room. Her voice was too bright, too sweet, like poison stirred into honey. "Elaine? Could you come in here? We want to discuss a few things." I took one last breath, lifted my chin, and stepped toward the doorway. They thought they were setting the stage. But the stage was mine. And I was walking into that room fully prepared to take back everything they had tried to steal. I walked into the living room slowly, deliberately, each step measured like I was crossing a courtroom floor rather than my own house. Marissa and her family sat arranged on the furniture, as if they were holding some kind of tribunal. David stood near the window, arms folded, eyes down, like a man waiting for a storm to break, but refusing to acknowledge he helped create it. Marissa gestured to the armchair across from her. "Sit, Elaine. We need to go over some official matters." Her voice dripped with artificial politeness, the kind used to corral someone into agreement. I didn't sit. Not yet. Instead, I scanned the room. On the coffee table were 2 stacks of papers, fresh, crisp, and unmistakably legal. A pen lay beside them. And in the center was the folder David had held the night I overheard him. So this was it. Their moment. The one they'd been choreographing behind closed doors. I finally sat down, not because she asked, but because I wanted to look each of them in the eyes. Marissa cleared her throat, glancing briefly at her mother as if seeking confirmation. "Elaine, we've spoken with some advisors and honestly, the house is too much for you to maintain alone. We're worried. It's time we step in for your own good." Her mother nodded in exaggerated sympathy. "You deserve comfort at your age." "And peace," Marissa added. I raised an eyebrow. "Peace for whom?" A flicker of irritation crossed her face. "For all of us," she said quickly. "We think it's best if the property is transferred to David. That way, we can take care of the renovations, handle the upkeep, make it safer for you." She pushed the stack of documents toward me. "And all you need to do," she continued with a saccharine smile, "is sign." David finally spoke, his voice thin. "Mom, this really is the easiest way." I looked at my son, really looked at him. His eyes were tired, conflicted, but resigned. The boy who once protected me from playground insults now stood silently while his wife orchestrated the dismantling of my life. Marissa tapped the papers. "Let's just get this done." That was her mistake. Just get this done. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my neatly labeled folder, the one marked altered documents. I laid it calmly on the table beside their stack. "What's this?" Marissa asked, her voice sharper now. "Evidence," I said softly, "of what you've been doing." Confusion rippled across David's face. Marissa stiffened. I opened the folder and removed the first page. A photocopy of my insurance document, the beneficiary line smudged and rewritten in faint pencil. David's name added, then erased, then added again. I set it on the coffee table. Marissa's mother shifted uncomfortably. Her sister leaned forward. David's eyes widened. Next, I placed the photographs of my ransacked drawers. The missing lockbox key noted in my handwriting. The scans of every original document. Then, finally, I pulled out the envelope from the contracting company. I laid it directly in front of Marissa. Her face drained of color. These, I said quietly, were delivered to this house. Without my knowledge. Renovation plans made in my son's name. Marked with your handwriting. David swallowed hard. Mom, where did you get? Where do you think? I asked, turning to him. They were hidden under a stack of games in my own dining room. Carelessly left as if I'd never notice. Marissa reached for the envelope, but I snapped it back before she could touch it. Oh no, I said, voice steady. You don't get to hide this now. The room fell silent. Then I reached for my phone and tapped the screen. A recording began to play. Marissa's voice filled the room. Clear. Sharp. Unmistakable. Don't give her time to question it. Just be firm. We're doing the right thing. David's voice followed, quieter but undeniably his. Let's just finish the paperwork and get this done. Marissa jolted forward, eyes wild. You were listening? No, I replied calmly. I was documenting. I let the recording play until the last incriminating word echoed into the thick, stunned silence. Then I opened another folder. This one containing the footage from the small motion-activated cameras. There, in still photos and time-stamped clips, were images of her sister entering my bedroom, rifling through my drawers, handling my lockbox. Marissa's mouth fell open. Her family shifted in panic. David looked like a man slowly realizing he was standing on sinking ground. You invaded my privacy, I said. You attempted to alter my documents. You planned to take my home, quietly, strategically, and cruelly. I closed the folder. And worst of all, I added, looking directly at my son, you were willing to let it happen. David's eyes filled with shame. Mom. I didn't think. You didn't think at all, I said gently but firmly. Not about me. Marissa's mask cracked entirely. You can't prove any of this holds up legally, she snapped. I smiled. A slow, knowing smile. That's exactly why, I said, lifting another folder. I've already sent duplicates of everything to my friend Linda. And to an attorney. Her face drained. And guess what they said? That I have more than enough evidence of elder interference, property manipulation, and coercion. Marissa stumbled back. David sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I stood. This home will remain mine, I said. And you will not speak to me about transferring anything ever again. I turned to the door, pausing only once. And if any of you try something like this again, I added quietly, the next conversation will happen in a courtroom. Then I walked out, leaving behind the shocked silence, the broken plan, and the family who had finally seen exactly who they were dealing with. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me, letting the cold air wash over my skin. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Really breathe. The lake was quiet, the wind steady, and the world blessedly free of whispers and schemes. Inside, their voices rose in frantic tones. Marissa snapping accusations, her mother defending herself, her sister swearing she didn't mean anything by it. And David? I heard nothing from him. Just silence. Heavy, ashamed silence. I didn't go back in. I walked down the steps and sat on the wooden bench Samuel built decades ago, curling my fingers around its familiar grooves. My hands steadied. My pulse calmed. The chaos behind me felt distant, like a storm finally passing after beating on the windows for too long. 20 minutes later, the door opened. One by one, Marissa's relatives filed out to their cars, eyes down, shoulders hunched, avoiding my gaze like children caught stealing cookies. Not one offered an apology. They climbed into their vehicles and sped off, tires crunching over gravel. Then came Marissa. She paused at the top of the steps, her face pale, her expression stripped of every ounce of smug confidence. You overreacted, she muttered. I didn't answer. You ruined everything, she snapped when silence met her again. Still nothing. Her jaw clenched and she hurried to her car, slamming the door so hard it echoed across the lake. She peeled out of the driveway without looking back. The house grew quiet. Finally, David stepped onto the porch. He didn't come toward me. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring out at the water like a lost boy trying to find the courage to speak. "Mom," he began, voice cracking. "I'm sorry." I didn't turn to him. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much, and the wound was still raw. "You should have protected me," I said softly. His breath hitched. "I know." Silence stretched between us. Heavy, painful, honest. "I didn't think they'd take it this far," he whispered. "They did," I replied. "And you let them." He flinched like I'd struck him. "I'll fix it," he said. "I swear I'll make this right." "Good," I said. "Because trust doesn't return on promises. It returns on actions." He nodded, swallowed hard, and walked back inside, giving me space, maybe for the first time in months. In the days that followed, things moved quickly. The attorney I'd contacted confirmed what Linda already told me. I had more than enough documented evidence to protect myself legally. David withdrew every document Marissa had pushed onto his plate. Renovation plans were canceled. No one, absolutely no one, could touch my property again without my full, written consent. The house is mine. My peace is mine. My dignity is mine. And though the betrayal still aches, something stronger has taken root in its place. A reminder that age does not make us fragile, nor invisible, nor easy to push aside. Sometimes, age makes us unbreakable. In the quiet that followed everything, after the legal dust settled, after Marissa's family disappeared from my life, after David's apologies began to sound like something closer to truth than guilt, I found myself sitting alone at the dining table one morning, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. Sunlight spilled across the wood, catching the grooves Samuel carved decades ago. Outside, the lake shimmered. The world felt still again. Mine again. And in that moment, a realization settled over me with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Growing older doesn't erase who we are. It doesn't make us disposable. It doesn't dim our strength. If anything, it reveals it. People think aging means shrinking, retreating, becoming silent. They forget we have weathered storms they can't even name. They forget our hands built the very worlds they now take for granted. They forget that resilience is something earned, painfully, honestly, over decades. I learned something through all this, and it's something I want any woman listening to hear. You are not a burden. Not because you've worked hard or sacrificed or held families together, though many of us have. You are not a burden because your worth was never conditional on what you could give, fix, or carry. You matter because you exist. You deserve respect because you have lived. You have a voice because you earned it with every year you've survived. Do not let anyone, child, spouse, in-law, or stranger, convince you otherwise. And if someone ever tries to take advantage of your age, your trust, your loneliness, or your kindness, remember this. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it moves quietly, strategically, with dignity, just like we've learned to do after a lifetime of getting back up. And if you're sitting there today wondering whether you still have fight left in you, let me tell you the truth. You do. You always will. And you deserve to stand your ground just as fiercely as I did. That's my story. Painful in places, empowering in others, and honest all the way through. I never imagined I'd have to defend my own home, my own history, or my own worth. Especially from people who should have protected me. But life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. And sometimes, those tests reveal a strength we didn't realize was still living inside us. If you've listened all the way to the end, I want to ask you something, not out of obligation, but out of community. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven your son? Would you have stood your ground the same way? Your voice matters more than you think. Your story, your experience, your wisdom. They might be exactly what another woman needs to hear tonight. Someone out there might be facing the same loneliness, the same manipulation, the same fear, and your comment could be the reminder that she is not alone. And if you find strength, comfort, or even just companionship in stories like mine, then I want to ask you, warmly, sincerely, to subscribe to this channel. Here, your voice is valued. Your presence is seen. Your story matters. Thank you for listening.